ties your family together? What are the binds and bounds that hold you together with the people you're sitting with, the people that live far from you, the people that you would call family? I think the first definition we come up with is nuclear family, the blood relatives that we have, sometimes for good and sometimes for worse, right? The ones that we want to sort of hide and ignore. But family is so much broader than that, so much wider. There's so many more definitions than that. Maybe you caught the viral video of the little boy who got a Christmas present from his family. He was sat down in a ring of family members, and he was given this little box. He's probably 10 or 11 years old. And he opened the gift, and the girl that gave it to him said, there's one more gift for you. This is the last one. And he rips it open like any 10 or 11-year-old boy would do, and he pulls out the gift, and it's a letter. And he reads the letter, and like 3 sentences in, he starts bawling because it says that you are going to be part of our forever family now. We have officially adopted you. And all of his family that are surrounding him are bawling, and the millions of people that watched it on social media were bawling too, because there's adoptive family that's just as strong as blood family. But family is even broader than that. Being a sports fan, we talk about sports family all the time. There's members sitting in the room right now that are part of Packer Nation, and you live and die with the Packers. But even the athletes that play have a family bond. I can remember back to my playing days, and the boys, the young men that I played with, they were my brothers. Or they're your sisters, because you fight for the same goals and you want to win championships, and you sweat together and you breathe hard together and you bleed together sometimes. That's family. It's broader than that. Sometimes there's military family, or there's work family, or there's a small group family from church that you cherish above all else. I think what bonds family together, what binds them and ties them together is kind of a shared belief system and shared morals and shared values and a shared faith in God. That's why we at New Hope talk about a New Hope family. And we want so very much for everyone to be a part of the New Hope family. It's not weird for us to say that. It's not off-putting. Nobody wrinkles their nose at that, because all of us understand so well that family takes on a myriad of different definitions. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to have family ties. We're going to tie our spiritual shoes, so to speak. We're going to tie ourselves together. And when we do that, we'll be ready to run the race that God puts before us. And as we tie our spiritual shoes together in this family, we hope that you can then tie your shoes in your other families, in your homes, your workplaces, with your sports teams. So 2 weeks, 2 laces, 2 shoes. And when we get it all tied together, we can run this race God puts before us. Or at least we can do it more safely than if our shoelaces are like my kids sometimes, and they flop all around like that. So the first lace that we grab hold of today is that of commitment. What are we committed to? Commitment to one another strengthens the family in church, but it's commitment that is key in all of our families, no matter how we would define family. our work families, our hobby families, our military families, our sports families. Commitment is key. So did you know that the USDA says that a middle-class family will spend over $200,000 to raise a child from birth to 17 years old? It's a lot of money. And maybe you can think to a time in your life where you had a buddy or a relative that fell on hard times and you needed to help them out with some cash. Surprisingly, I can remember the very first time that I had the opportunity to do that. It was in 1999. I was a sophomore in college at Concordia in River Forest, and a cousin of mine, 18 months older, lived in a different suburb of Chicago, and she called me up on the phone. She said, "Chris, I need some help." And I was able to help her. And I was blessed to do it, and I loved giving her the $40 that I gave her. Maybe you've had an experience like that. Maybe you remember a time where your neighbor borrowed a tool, didn't give it back. See, all of those things and so much more go into the sum total of what it costs to be family with the people around us. It's costly to be family with people, to be committed to Christ and our faith and our belief. There's a cost to it, but it is so worth the cost. I would contend or propose that to be committed to our family, to change our family, to do the best for our family, is to be committed to our faith. To be wholeheartedly and fully committed to our faith in Jesus Christ. When I think about that, I can't help but think about the challenge that Joshua puts before the children of God. All the way back in the Old Testament, before the people had entered into the promised land, Joshua challenges the children of Israel. He says this, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you," another translation puts it, "if it seems evil to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve." And he goes through a litany of false gods that they could choose. And at the end of the verse, he says, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." He's asking for a radical commitment on the part of the Israelites to follow God. And it's a difficult time for them. They've been wandering the wilderness, not knowing how they would eat or where their God was for decades. And Joshua challenges them to commit in this moment before they enter into the promised land, before the commitment to God would be so much easier. So what is commitment? What is this word? You can see here the definitions: to give in charge or to entrust someone else, obviously, to put or to roll. I love that last word, to roll. It helps me to understand that instead of running my own life, I'm to roll everything over to God. It's what Psalm 37 says, to commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. This is what he will do. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. It'll be intense and powerful. It'll be life-giving to commit. So what does commitment look like in my life? Well, looks like her. Meet our dog, Selah. She's the 9th member of our family. And Selah will lay like this for all of us in the family. We ask her to. Not just myself as the head of the household, not just Susan who feeds her all the time, but Tabitha and Leah can get Selah to lay like this. And a lot of times she'll kind of lift her leg up and she'll expose her belly to us. To say, I've rolled over in submission and surrender, in complete trust and commitment to you because I know that you are committed to me. It's a rollover kind of commitment. What does it look like in the scriptures? How we see it in Abraham. We see it as Abraham is challenged by God in Genesis chapter 22 to take his son Isaac to the top of the mountain and to sacrifice him, to kill him. And it's at that moment where God wants to know in Abraham, do you love the Lord? Do you love your son? Or do you love your Savior? That's rollover commitment. So Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 to 39, we see a couple of pictures of what committed, tied together with Christ love looks like. The first thing it looks like is that we would love Jesus more than anyone else. Matthew 10, verse 37 says, anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. That's interesting. As I look out and see fathers looking at their sons and mothers looking at their daughters. It's interesting passage when we think about New Hope Christian School and all the families who are here and parents who are dedicated to their kids and kids who love their parents dearly, that Matthew would record Jesus saying these words. But it's commitment to love Jesus more than anyone else. You see, if we allow our love for our children to be more than our love for Jesus, we put our children in danger. And if we allow our love for our spouse, I love my wife to death, but not as much as I love Jesus. But if we allow our love for our spouse or our parents to be more than our love for Jesus, then we put ourselves in danger. It's why Abraham was willing to trek up the mountain with his son completely oblivious. And he was ready to drive the knife into his son that he had waited decades for. To love Jesus more than anyone else is a hard ask by God. It's commitment. And is commitment easy to us only when it serves our needs? Is commitment available to us? Are we willing to do it only when it's easy or it's pleasing? Or are we committed fully to the point even of death? Jesus drives this point home as he talks about it in the text, that family is foundational, but faith comes first. Family is foundational, but faith comes first. If we're out of balance and there's an overemphasis on family, then we can be robbed of faith. But doesn't family look different? I didn't share one of the ways that we define family earlier in the message to start out with. There's sports family and there's There's work family, there's church family, all these good definitions of family. But what if there's a family of one? What if I've put my pleasures and my desires above all else, and I think I'm just a family of one? Well, Jesus in Matthew chapter 10 addresses that. He says that we should love Jesus more than ourselves. Verses 38 and 39, these are pretty familiar verses to all of us. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. See, cross bearers are called to follow the crucified one. And discipleship is hard because we're called to die to our desires. I think the cross has been romanticized in our world today, myself included. We wear the cross around our necks or in our ears, or we tattoo it on our bodies, or we put it on our walls, or we sit it on our desks, or we find every which way to celebrate the cross without understanding its true meaning. Just for fun, I put in the word cross at Etsy.com. How many of you are familiar with Etsy? Good. Yeah, I love Etsy. It's a really neat place where you can see great craftsmanship. It's like an online high-end craft fair. But if you type cross into Etsy.com, you can buy over 760,000 items with a cross or made out of or are in the shape of a cross. 750,000 items that are a cross. And even this passage, to pick up our cross, when we do reference it, I think it comes more in the idea, well, that's just a cross I'm going to have to bear, and it's in relationship to some obnoxious relative that we have to deal with, or it's an illness or some kind of affliction that we have to live with. But we forget the cross was an instrument of death. And the one who carried the cross was a condemned criminal. They were carrying it to their death, a horrific, excruciating execution. So if you saw someone carrying a cross or wearing a cross, they were saying goodbye to everything. And there was no turning back. So Jesus kind of hits hard with this idea of human relationship. And he says to love him more than anyone else, more than the people that are sitting right next to you at this very moment. To love Jesus more than you have love for the people that you have your arm around at this very moment. And then he drives it home by saying to love Jesus more than any of your desires, any of your pleasures, any of your hopes and dreams. That's the level of commitment that Christ speaks of. What's interesting is that there's a parallel account of this passage in Luke chapter 14. It's the same event, it's the same moment that two people are looking at it, two different eyewitnesses, so they write about it just a little bit different. And Luke writes that there are large crowds of people following Jesus when he is teaching and when he's doing miracles, when he's feeding them. There's large crowds of people when he says these words. And at the moment that he says these words, the crowds begin to thin out. But in that moment, Jesus doesn't lower the bar. He doesn't clamor after more likes or more shares or more friends or followers. He doesn't lower the bar so that people will stay. Instead, he sets the bar. He sets the bar high. So high that you and I can't even reach it. See, this level of commitment that Jesus speaks of, this radical level of commitment, rollover style commitment that he talks about, he knew would divide families. He knew would cause division in homes. He knew it would cause internal consternation in our hearts and in our heads. But he doesn't lower the bar. Instead, he sets it so high that only he could reach it. And when you and I try and fail, and when you and I don't even try and don't even feel bad about not trying, Jesus does what only Jesus can do. And he grabs the bar and he holds on. And he dies on the cross. He picks up his cross and carries it to his death. But in victory, he rises again. He pays the price of sin for all the world, for you and me, for mother and father, brother and sister, for all the body of Christ that we would call family. Jesus reaches the bar. I came across this quote in a book I was reading. The title of the book is really long and it's kind of hard to see in the picture. It's Crazy You, One Dad's Crash Course in Getting His Kid into College. I'm of the age where I'm starting to think about that kind of stuff. So I read this book and I would recommend it, but this quote is what I really clung to. You fulfill yourself by denying yourself, preparing the people you can't live without to live without you. Man, as I think about my son going off to college, it's hard to prepare him to live without me because I can't live without him. It's my commitment to him. It's my love for him. But to love him well is to prepare him to live without me. That's the picture of commitment. To know that it's bigger than me, it's bigger than us. That this is God-sized stuff. And Abraham got it. Abraham was ready to drive a knife into a son he had waited decades for. He got commitment and faith. And Joshua got it, standing at the entrance to the promised land after giving the Israelites false god after false god. You can worship Canaanite gods or Mesopotamian gods. You could worship anybody you want, but me and my family, we're going to serve the Lord. He got it, even if he had to stand there alone. And Jesus got it. Jesus' life and death and resurrection were all to prepare us to live without him, so that we would never be without him. It was a commitment written in blood, and the bright light of the empty tomb highlights it for our eternity.